And we're getting into John Meacham territory when we talk about the 1807 Insurrection Act, signed by President Thomas Jefferson. The president, the White House, mentioned that yesterday. In his remarks from the Rose Garden as well, he threatened to deploy the U.S. military to suppress the demonstrations, which he called acts of domestic terror.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror. The destruction of innocent life and the spilling of innocent blood is an offense to humanity and a crime against God. That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans. I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
In order to activate the military to operate inside the United States, President Trump, as I said, would have to invoke the 213-year-old Insurrection Act, which was last used during the 1992 Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. So, Gene Robinson, the president is talking there about the rioters, about the looters that we saw out again in New York City. But the distinction we have to make is that his police used tear gas and smoke and flashbangs against peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square last night. Those were not rioters or looters. He cleared that park so he could walk and stand in front of that church for a couple of seconds. I'm struck, too, just listening to the president's remarks, watching his tweets, how he can barely pay lip service to what the protests are about. Not the rioting, not the looting, which are terrible, but what the protests are about, the origins of this, why people are so upset, not just about the death of George Floyd, but about generations of deaths like his. The president does not address that. He wants to go to the law and order piece of it. Everyone wants these streets under control so businesses and small business owners aren't being beat up in public and having things stolen from their storefronts. But he cannot address the underlying problem, perhaps because he doesn't understand it.
He doesn't understand it. He's not interested in understanding it. I mean, this just in, Donald Trump is a liar. He said in his remarks, I'm an ally of all peaceful protesters, as he had peaceful protesters attacked with flashbangs and tear gas and rubber bullets. We arrived at this crisis moment because of the long succession of police killings of African Americans that people finally got fed up with and said no more. Governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, and consent is withdrawn for that. From not just African Americans protesting, but if you look at the protest crowds, they are remarkably diverse in every imaginable way, and people just poured out to say enough. And so, of course, we decry any violence, but you have to understand that this moment is real, that this crisis is real, and that we as a nation need to do something about this now, because time is up. And we are deeply unfortunate to have the worst possible president at this moment, because he is not capable of that sort of empathy. He is not capable of feeling anyone else's pain except his own. And so the result is the display we saw yesterday. And so, the 1807 Insurrection Act, well, if George H.W. Bush used it during the L.A. riots, and in the hands of George H.W. Bush, it was okay. It was okay because he understands the idea of America in a way that President Trump does not. And so in the hands of Donald Trump, this is extremely dangerous. And I, like John Meacham, have always shied away from hyperbole about dictatorial rule and wither American democracy, and have always believed we will get past this, we will get over this, we are stronger and more resilient. But there are powerful tools in the hands of any president, and other presidents have not used them because they have known that it was beyond the pale to do so. Donald Trump doesn't know that, doesn't care about that, and so I am more worried than I have ever been about the future of this democracy.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.